Welcome, welcome, and bienvenidos. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, Tech and Tequila. If you don't know who I am, I'm Kat Lopez Shelby, and I'm the founder and CEO of Shelby Technology Solutions. But more importantly, you're here for Tech and Tequila, where we learn a lot about tech and we may have some nice tequila drinks while we're at it. If you're new here, Tech and Tequila is all about everything technology based for your business. So what that means is we have suppliers on here to talk about how they can help you grow your business. We, have mindset coaches on here talking about how to help you grow your business. We're all about business and basically introducing you to different suppliers and different ways that help you within your business. Welcome, welcome, and bienvenidos. Thank you for joining us back on Tech and Tequila. I am super excited to be able to share with you today a couple of things. I know last time I was teasing that we were going to have a guest on the show, and unfortunately they got sick, so we had to reschedule. But it is that season. It's flu, strep, everything season as we round out the end of the year, so to speak. So I don't know if your kids have had it, but I've heard all about it, and my daughter has had strep recently as well. But so I thought today I would go over and I would talk about, I don't want to say some basics, but some things that have come up in the last couple of weeks with my clients. And, one of those things is what I want to call having a backup plan for the backup plan for the backup plan. And ironically, that's exactly what my client called it. And we were talking about it the other day because I have a particular client that has locations here and they have locations in other parts of the world. And we were talking about setting up redundancy for all their locations. Because while each of their locations is not very big and they only have, let's say, maximum 5 to 6 employees there, and that's the max, some of them have 2 to 3. It's the fact that if something goes down, they're out for an entire day. And so we were going through this with their tech stack and talking about what it looks like for them if that was to happen. And obviously, with having locations here in the US plus locations other places, I don't want to say the discussion is different, but the discussion is, okay, what are our options? What can we look into? What exactly are they utilizing? And for the most part, this client, a lot of the stuff that people are doing that are not in the US is SaaS or software based applications. So, really, the most important thing when we were talking is making sure that they have some form of consistent internet. And I know that kind of seems very basic to a lot of people, but when I interact with my clients and when we were talking to this client, it's think about it. If your internet goes out at your house, I mean, I don't know about you, but I have kids that are freaking out because they can't get on their games. We personally do not subscribe to any cable company anymore. So we're without TV. And, obviously we all have mobile phones or cell phones, so we can still look at stuff. But, if you want to think about what is the backbone of your business? And then always the secondary is how much does it cost your business, and cost can be many things. That can be financial costs, that can be reputational costs, that can just be customer, which goes along with customer frustration, but what is the cost of you going down? And when we were talking, for example, one of the remote workers that they have does all their billing. And so dependent upon, obviously we'd like to say the stars align and they go down on a not so busy day. But we were talking about an instance where they had intermittent issues and they had to have everything in by the 15th in order to get paid, or it gets moved to the following month. So, I say this is you want to have a backup plan for the backup plan for the backup plan. And I use that as an example. You want to think about your internet first, right? So, or think about your connectivity. For a lot of businesses, that is the backbone of your your business. I mean, even if you're not brick and mortar, it's how are you fulfilling your orders and what are you doing? But the secondary for that is, if you're a business that takes incoming calls from customers or does outgoing calls for customers, is what happens? Like, how do you maintain that? So, this is why I always say when you're looking at a solution, a communication solution, you want to make sure that you're thinking through that process. Like, how easy is it if, let's say, your internet's down or you can't get into the office or you need to be remote for you to go in to an online dashboard or online program and be able to forward that phone? Or are you going to set it up to always be forwarded? I recently was interacting with a customer, and one of their biggest complaints is when they've had issues where their phones have gone down or their internet has been out or they couldn't get to the office with the particular company that they're with, they go in and they have to submit a trouble ticket. It takes 24 hours before it gets worked. And she said, generally, that's the way it is. And then it gets forwarded. So if they're without internet, it's not an immediate thing. So generally, when I interact with my clients, the things that I talk about, especially with communications and phone systems, is number one, how can your phone system make you money? Which I know for a lot of people that sounds like, what? But, it's about how do your clients want to interact with you? That can be everything from, if you work in a business where it's appointments, like how are you setting up appointment reminders? Because when someone doesn't show up, number one, that's kind of a waste of your time. But also a lot of times people need to be reminded we're busy and every day. But the other thing is, going back to what I was just talking about a minute ago, is when you're looking at a solution for your phones or something of that nature, you want to think about, can I go online and have a dashboard? Is there a desktop app? Do I still want a desk phone? Which I know a lot of people like that physical handset. I was just reading a meme the other day. It's like, I'm so old, I can remember when you got mad and you wanted to like hang up on people, you slam the phone down. Well, while I do not recommend slamming the phones down, that might void your warranty. I still understand people who want desktop phones, and that's something to look at. But the other thing is, do you have a mobile app? How are you forwarding? Like, it's a conversation to be had. And so, so just what I'm saying is, when you sit down and you're at the precipice of making a change, or you just want to do a tech review and look at what you have and say, this is working, this is not, is make sure that you are, having that discussion about what does this look up? How can we have redundancy? What happens if this happens? You want to look through those scenarios and have someone walk through those scenarios with you. Because at the end of the day, having a backup plan or a backup plan or a backup plan, as my client told me, it prepares your business. It prepares you. And that way, number one, you've already got a plan in place. And hopefully you've tested that plan, because I cannot say that enough. But also, going back to it, you're prepared and you're ready to go. So the second thing I wanted to talk about today, and I haven't covered this in a while, but I do think it's worthwhile to talk about. And that is the benefits of working with somebody who is vendor agnostic. I remember I said that once to a client and they were like, what do you mean agnostic? And I was like, all right, so let's go into this. So what does that mean? What does it mean to be vendor agnostic? So first off, vendor agnostic means that I am not married to a particular solution, supplier, carrier. Number one, you're going to have access to, on average, 200 different provider options. And why is that important? That's because working with a trusted advisor or someone, they have your best interests as the customer in their mind. And I'm probably going to say this a couple times during this discussion, but they're not going to bring a solution to the table and have this like try to shove a round peg into a square hole. And I think sometimes you might have a carrier, and we see this all the time. We see carriers that have multiple technology solutions that they can offer. But the thing is, when you're working with someone who has access to all these different providers and who really takes your needs into consideration, that means that what they're looking at is which of these carriers is going to fit you best. You know, think of it in a way, it's like The Bachelor, except without roses and dating. But basically, they're saying, you tell me what you want. And, let's work with it. Let's work with your budget. Let's figure out who's going to be best for you. Versus sometimes when you're working with a particular carrier, they're like, oh, we do that too. So let's look at this. The other thing is that, working with a tech advisor is that you have one person that you're reaching out to. So a lot of times by default, I've worked with clients that have gone with a particular carrier. And at the end of the day, I ask them, why did you pick this person for this solution, this solution, this solution? They're like, because it was easy. They were already here. Which, honestly, I think every day when we're in business, we want it to be easy. We want to work smarter, not harder. And obviously, the easier option is going to be bam, 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 what you're going to go with. But the thing is, number one, if you have questions about your solution, you have one person to contact. If you need help or you're having any issues or, anything of that nature, there's less finger pointing, and there's also someone who's going to advocate for you. What I always tell people is your tech is going to tech sometimes, and we all have that joke sometimes where it's like, oh, my computer decided it was Monday. They need a little more weekend. Or you hit Friday and you're like, my computer is just, it decided to take off early from work, whatever it may be. So, your tech is going to tech, but having a tech advisor means that, number one, a lot of times they have experience with these different carriers. Number two, if it comes down to carrier A and carrier B saying, this is this, they're going to say, hey, we need a vendor meet. And they're going to proactively do that versus, okay, now we're 15 phone calls in and we can't get anything accomplished, So that. The other thing is that, they're going to look and build a strategy just for you. So someone who's a tech advisor, this person is a seasoned expert. They're going to pinpoint what's the best pricing, what's the best solution, and they're going to construct a plan. And I know I talk about this in several of the previous podcasts, but it's that idea of let's make a plan to get you from point A to point B, right? And whether that's, kind of internet is like, okay, if right now this is what's going to work. And I'll use the example of sometimes I run into a situation, especially out in West Texas, where I have a client that moves to a new location. They're out on some West County road, we'll just say 87 to make it simple. And for whatever reason, did not preemptively reach out to their internet service provider or to anyone in particular, their MSP, myself, whomever. And now they're like, okay, we're moving in 2 weeks. And lo and behold, this location has billed out, or this location is not serviceable by who they have right now. And so when you're building that strategy out, number one, we have a solution for you. Let's get you up and going by the date you needed while we're working on the underlying internet being put in. The other thing is, when we look at a cybersecurity offering or any type of compliance and regulatory things, there's lots of planning that goes into place where it's like, here's all the solutions that we recommend that help you with NIST, that help you with, HIPAA, PCI, whatever the compliance or regulatory is. Now, how do we implement those and get those set up and done? Another reason is because they develop a long-term relationship with lots of these suppliers. And they're vested in the fact that this is their business and they don't want a bunch of turnover and they don't want you to have a bad experience. And I always use the example, there are carrier solutions that are great when a client is billing, between $5,000 to $10,000 a month. And if I have a client that comes in and says, hey, I really think this is the best fit, let's look at it, let's go after it. And let's say they're going to bill, $500, $600 a month. And eventually they'll get to the $5,000-$10,000 a month, but that's not where they're going to start. I'm always going to have a conversation with them about like, hey, I want to let you know and set the expectation that for this particular carrier supplier to have a dedicated customer service manager or a dedicated implementation specialist, this is what they require. The other thing is that, working with a tech advisor is that they're handy when negotiating upgrades or contract changes or managing escalations, which I kind of touched on a little bit. But it's having that line to say, hey, this is what's going on. Let's get it fixed. Let's get it done. The other thing is unlike working with an ISP, a tech advisor, I say an ISP, carrier, supplier, whatever, a tech advisor is an extension of your team. And so they're looking at what are your company goals? What are you trying to achieve? And how are you going to achieve them? The other thing is, dependent upon the size of your IT department, dependent upon who takes care of it, and I always say this, I deal with clients that, one of their office administrator or office manager is the person who mainly takes care of everything. And for them to be having to deal with a supplier or renegotiating something or going through different options is going to take hours. Whereas if you're working with a tech advisor, tech consultant, they're doing that back end work versus having someone on your team that's taking them out of their everyday task or things that they need to get done or specific things that in your business you want to make happen, areas of focus. And obviously it goes back to the research. What I was talking about is, number one, what I was saying before is a tech advisor has experience working with different suppliers, different carriers. And so they know like, hey, this is who I would recommend and this is why, so that you're not having to guess, And of course, I myself recommend this to everybody, but, a trusted tech advisor is working on staying on top of all the technology that's available as much as possible. One of the other things that I say is that a tech advisor's sole purpose, but job or something that, I diligently work on. I know lots of other tech advisors that I interact, network with, MSPs, is to stay current with cutting edge technology. What does that mean? That means that they're keeping a pulse on the constantly revolving and updating cloud, telecom, customer service, CPaaS, CCaaS, everything, and making sure that they're having that conversation with you. I think we've all heard of people who like to be server huggers or people who want to be on-prem phone system huggers, which, we run into a lot of those in the field, but it's once you get to the point like, okay, how are we going to move to the cloud? How are we going to do this? Is when you're working with someone who's a trusted tech advisor, generally there's two things. Number one, they're keeping a pulse to know what is new, what's available, what's going to be the best option. Number two, they're going to bring the right engineers, the right suppliers to the table because they're not, a particular supplier saying, hey, so we've got this solution and this is what I think. That whole round peg or square peg into a round hole, said that backwards. But, those are some of the reasons that I recommend looking outside of this. So those are some of the benefits. I think I hit on about 10 of them, give or take a few numbers, but I would really say if I had to pick the top three is being vendor agnostic, so not being married to a particular supplier or carrier. And one of the examples I use with that is I actually worked with a company a while back, and we went down this path with a particular carrier and got, I won't say to the tail end, but we got through contract negotiations, we got everything set, and the pricing that the customer was given when it said, okay, they ended up after doing the full on-site surveys and sending the engineers out and doing this was going to be like $60,000 more than what the customer was expecting. So went back to the table, said, all right, here's the deal. This is not going to work. And at the end of the day, with that particular carrier, with that supplier, they weren't able to make it work. But we were able to go out with that same location, figure out a separate solution, and ended up saving them. I mean, off of, like I said, it's like 60,000 more than what the customer was expecting, bringing that back down to what they were expecting, very close to. Their monthly ended up being a little bit more, but in the long run, they were super happy, and we were able to get that installed in 6 months for them. Installed, everything implemented, construction done, and everything set, and have them up and going in about 6 months. So that's why I say it's so important to work with someone who's vendor agnostic. Obviously, the other thing is working with a trusted tech, you're going to have they have a huge provider portfolio to pick from, and then also they have the ability to reach out to not only the suppliers for engineers, but different TSDs for engineers, and bring them to the table to make sure that everything works. So I know this was a little bit short and sweet and to the point, but I really wanted to cover those two things. So one was to have a backup plan for your backup plan, to have a backup plan. The other thing is, if you've traditionally just gone direct to the supplier or carrier, and have had this happen a lot recently where the person who they've always interacted with is now gone and they're not having the best experience, or they're kind of getting pawned off in a way that they don't like, then, look into it. Look at the different, tech consultants that are out there. I'm always going to recommend myself, but there are so many, especially if it's very important for you to have someone that's local or someone that's within your state, that this is a whole other option for you to look at. So look forward to it. Next week, we have a great episode coming up. That's all for today.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Tech and Tequila. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. To stay updated about all things tech and more, don't forget to visit us at our website, shelbyts.com. If you loved what you heard, remember to show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our podcast. Your 5-star ratings and reviews mean the world to us and help us to reach more listeners just like you. So muchas gracias again for joining us with Tech and Tequila. Thank you so much. You learned a lot about tech, and maybe you had a nice drink of tequila.